Dan, so great to see you. So great to have you here. You've been a legend in this community for so long. You've been the CEO of Health Catalyst for quite some time, leading that company. Tell us about where you're at today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Clint. It's good to see you again, and it's great to be here and involved with Silicon Slopes. It's been a blessing for many, many years to be involved. We love what you're leading. We love what you're doing, and certainly we at Health Catalyst have really benefited. So for me, it's we're coming up on 14 years with Health Catalyst.
It's incredible.
The company just celebrated its 16th anniversary, so it's been an amazing ride. When I got started with the company, it was the two co-founders, and they just hired the first employee. And it's been an incredible journey. I started as the first investor in the company, and then about 9 months later became the CEO of the company and took on this role. And from that point, I think we had 5 or 6 people to today. We're getting close to the 1,500 team member mark, and
that is incredible.
It's been wonderful, and it's been exhausting, and it's been quite a roller coaster ride. And we just a couple of weeks ago marked our 5-year anniversary from when we went public. And if I knew then what I know now about what the next 5 years would have been like, it would have been surprising. We went public, just about 6 months before COVID hit, and the world changed for all of us. That was a tough time to be a public company. I think it's a tough time to lead any company. And then record high inflation hit, and the roller coaster has continued. So lots of ups and downs, but it's been an amazing journey.
How has your leadership style changed since you first became CEO to now?
Yeah, great question. When your company is at that startup phase of 3, 4, 5 people, there's a dynamic that exists, and it's really energizing, and it's fun, and you all really know each other well. You're all right there together, in a really small space. And there's certain things that you can do when you're at that size that you just can't do as you scale. And that's been, I think, a really important learning process for me. I don't think we've done it perfectly at all. And part of what I've had to internalize and realize is that you have to change your leadership approach and style. You have to figure out what can scale. And, for us at Health Catalyst, and one of the reasons that I got excited about Health Catalyst in the beginning was the sense of mission and purpose and culture that existed when it was 3 of us and 5 of us. And how do you hold on to that when you go from 5 people to 50 to 500 to 1,500 to 5,000, hopefully at some point in the future? And from a leadership perspective, part of what we hypothesized we needed to do was we got to figure out, once you get to a size and scale where you're not directly involved in the hiring process for every person, someone else is going to make those decisions. You have to then figure out, how do you build the culture right into the fabric, and so that you don't have to be there in order for that culture and that mission orientation to be maintained. Not an easy thing to do.
Yeah.
But I think we spent a lot of time early on, and I credit our co-founders. I think they had the best sense for how important this was. And for us, that started with, let's try to codify and document like what we mean when we talk about the Health Catalyst culture. What do we mean when we talk about our mission? And let's make sure we've documented it, that we defined it, and let's find ways where we can reinforce it. And if we can reinforce it at every level and constantly, then maybe those individuals that started with us, as the company expands, they'll help pass that along to others, and then as the company continues to grow, even when no one's looking, someone will decide, like, I want to live up to those principles and those values, and I believe in that mission. And even if I'm not there in the hiring process or the interview process, like, as long as we all agree on those principles and that culture and that mission orientation, then I don't need to be there, because And actually, no one likes to be micromanaged, right?
Yeah.
No one likes kind of a leadership style where you're really, really helicoptering and you're directly involved in everything like that. That will never scale, and that doesn't produce great engagement either. So I think that's one of the things we tried to do. Like, let's document, let's codify, and let's find ways of reinforcing. So we used, and we still use, things like our all team member meetings. We get everybody together, and we always start with the health catalog, right? The mission, the operating principles, the cultural attributes that we still really, really care about. Then we thought, well, how can we further build that into the fabric? So another way that we built it in is in the promotion process for our servant leaders. Every year they go through an evaluation process, a 360 process, and all the questions that the surveys, and we use Qualtrics, by the way, for those surveys. Way to go, Qualtrics. They're an awesome company, also here in Silicon Slopes. But all the questions are aligned to those operating principles, that mission orientation, and the cultural attributes. And so we hoped by doing things like that, it would reinforce and kind of build right into the fabric those important principles, and that would scale. And we've certainly not been perfect, and we've made a ton of mistakes along the way. But I think some of those actions and some of those reinforcing patterns have helped.
Yeah, that is incredible. I always forget, some people may not even know what Health Catalyst does. So what is Health Catalyst, and what's its mission?
Yeah. So from the beginning, Health Catalyst has been focused on how do you use data that you can then analyze to make healthcare better. And our co-founders came from Intermountain Healthcare. So they were working in a healthcare setting. And, healthcare was one of the last industries to go from paper-based records to digital data, electronic records. But once you make that transition, like in your medical record as a patient, when it goes from paper and a manila file folder to a digitized format, now there's data. And you can analyze that data. You can try to understand it. And in the process, then you can pinpoint where our healthcare system is working well and where it's not working well. And so that is the fundamental premise behind Health Catalyst is we build software that first brings data into a single source of truth. So data from lots of different sources. That could be your medical record data. That includes clinical information about you, about the conditions that you might be struggling with and the treatment that you've received. It includes financial information like, how much did those cost? Who did we bill? What's the insurance infrastructure that's supporting that? It could be operational information like, okay, you went to this facility. What was the throughput like? How long did you wait? Who interacted with you? How effective was that interaction? And now as that data becomes digital, putting it into a data warehouse, a single source of truth or a data platform gives you that opportunity to then harness that data to understand where you're good and where you're not so good. And so that second layer of software is really at the use case layer. So if you want to ask questions about the clinical care that you've received and how effective was it, and did we give you the right care at the right time in the right facility, we've built application layer software that really pinpoints that and highlights where we're strong and where we're weak. We have financial software that pinpoints how effective is the health system financially in terms of getting paid for the procedures that they provided and managing their costs so that they can be financially sustainable as well. And then we have operational software that highlights how is that throughput? How are the processes of you receiving care going? What are we doing well? What are we not doing so well? And then the last piece that we do is when a health system wants to work on an area that isn't going well, we have experts that can come in and consult and advise and help them actually work to improve. And so mostly software, but about a third of our revenue stream is also those expertise led services where we work with our clients to actually improve.
How are you thinking about artificial intelligence with all of this?
Yeah, it's a great...
I'm sure you've been using it for years.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, if you think about AI, there's the stuff that's been around for many years, and that has been something that we've been focused on for about a decade. We own a property of AI algorithms and solutions called healthcare.ai. And that's been something we've been investing in for many years. Generative AI is a newer set of opportunities. And we think about three general use cases where we're really focused on the use of AI. So the first is that area where we've been investing for a long time. And for us, we are a data and an analytics company. And we focus on healthcare use cases. And to really harness data, you need to visualize it, right? You need to look at charts. You need to look at dashboards to understand if it's clinical, how are we doing in the treatment of certain populations of patients. And what's interesting is without the use of AI, the human eye is just not that good at reading charts, it turns out. And we've studied this, we've analyzed this, and it's about a coin flip. Like if you give any person, and it actually doesn't matter how much training they could have a PhD in data science. You give them a chart and you ask them 5 or 6 basic questions about like what's going on in this chart about sepsis mortality. What's the average? Are we trending up or down? What are inliers? What are outliers? Where will we be headed in 6 months if nothing changes? And we're about 50-50 accurate as human beings in correctly interpreting the data. When you overlay healthcare.ai, so AI training algorithms that then just overlay that ability for the human eye to spot and see where's the average, what are the inliers, what are the outliers, have there been changes in performance, and if nothing changes, where will we be in 6 months? That accuracy level goes from 50-50 to about 95%. And so using that AI as the first use case is something that happens thousands of times every day across all of our clients. And that correct interpretation of data goes from 50-50 to 95+%. So that's a use case where we've been investing for a long, long time. And it is making healthcare decision-making a lot better. And we average about 10,000 calls a day to healthcare.ai so that every one of those 10,000 visualizations are better because of AI. The other 2 use cases are more focused on generative AI. And one of them is in an area that we've been investing in for a long time, which is in the treatment of patients. You often need to understand and report to the government, for example, how well we're treating certain populations of patients. So that could be diabetic populations or heart failure populations or other populations. So first you have to build out a registry of everyone that's gotten treatment for those conditions over a period of time. Then you need to catalog what treatment they received and then the outcome of that treatment. That typically requires really deep clinical knowledge to be able to get the right people in the registry, to know exactly what treatments they've received and then what the outcomes are. But we're finding that generative AI can make those clinical chart abstractors much more efficient, where
that's interesting.
About 90% of the time with the right training data set, AI can predict who ought to be in the registry, where to find the treatment data, and then where to put the outcome metrics and calculate those metrics. It's not perfect. In our training algorithms, we're about 91% accurate. So you still need that clinical expert double checking. But what we're finding is they're about 25% more efficient by using generative AI to predict and pull that data first. And then they correct the 9 or 10% of cases where it wasn't quite accurate. But they benefit from the other 90% of cases where they got it right. The clinician quickly validates that instead of them having to go manually and go find that data. Gen AI is doing that. So that's the second use case. The final use case is in our own software development, especially as it relates to the data platform, our next gen data platform, the one that is our 4th generation actually over the last 16 years, leverages generative AI for new enhancements in the data platform, as well as for existing maintenance of the platform. And we use that with our software developers. And that, again, creates about 25% efficiency advantages, where the Gen AI, when we describe what we're trying to accomplish, anticipates the code that we should write to accomplish that. And again, it's not perfect, but it saves 25% of the time of a developer, and it's about 90% accurate in anticipating what code needs to be written. And likewise, we offer that to our clients. So if they're wanting to maintain that data platform themselves, they get the benefit of that Gen AI as well. They can describe what they're trying to maintain, and the Gen AI is about 90% accurate in generating the code. And then a computer programmer just needs to kind of close that gap between the last 10%. So those are the three major use cases. We're really excited about it. We also recognize there's still the need for someone on the end of that Gen AI, those Gen AI use cases, to make sure it's fully accurate. And in healthcare, that really matters, because often people's lives are at stake. So it's less about replacement of individuals and more about just making them a lot more productive.
That's super interesting. Where do you think we're at? Like healthcare specifically, since that's your world, in 5 years with AI? I mean, is it ever going to get to 100%?
We tend to not think so at Health Catalyst. And I think if you look back 30 years, which is, now I'm really dating myself, but that's kind of when I got started in healthcare. Healthcare just generally takes a little longer to adopt new technologies. They were one of the last industries to adopt digitization, for example. And so the opportunities for data and analytics came later for healthcare. And there, I think, are some good reasons and maybe some bad reasons why healthcare is that way, but it is that way. And like I mentioned a minute ago, one of the good reasons is that the consequences of what we do in healthcare are very, very significant. Often people's lives are at stake. And so you don't want to take unnecessary risks when you're applying new technologies. So we agree with that perspective. And that's where we always think about technology as an enabling and supporting function that makes clinicians' lives a little bit better, a little bit more productive, a little bit more efficient, and isn't so much about replacing, but just making healthcare work better. And certainly the healthcare ecosystem needs to be more efficient. We can't afford to keep spending the percent of GDP that we do in the US. And so I think AI and other technologies are going to make healthcare more efficient, which I believe will make healthcare 5 years from now a little bit more affordable.
That's a big deal.
Yeah.
Just that alone would be awesome.
That'd be awesome.
So tell me about the decision to go public. And like you said, you went 6 months before COVID, and that kind of changed the world for the next 2-3 years. Maybe still has. There's still certainly some effects from that. What went into the decision, and how are you enjoying being a public company CEO?
Not sure I would use the word enjoying. But there have been moments. There have been great moments. And we've been reflecting a little bit as a leadership team about this as we got to the 5-year anniversary. And when I think about what led to the decision back in 2019 to go public, we try to always be data informed. And there were some good sort of rules of thumb about size and scale and predictability of a business to help you to understand if you had that level of size, scale, and predictability that you were ready. And one of the rules of thumb back then was, 100 million of recurring revenue would be a good milestone to hit. And in the year prior to us going public, we'd hit that 100 million threshold. From a predictability and a profitability perspective, back then, there wasn't a feeling that you needed to be profitable yet, and we weren't profitable at Health Catalyst, but we kind of had a clear line of sight as to how we were going to get there. And I'll tell you, like Clint, in terms of moments of my career, like that day we rang the bell at NASDAQ, it was awesome. And we had the 100 or so earliest team members, and we brought their plus ones there, and we were all there in New York City, and we rang the bell, and And, the moment we went public, we priced at $26 a share. And on that first day, our shares jumped 40%. I remember thinking, wow, I wonder if every day is going to be like this. So it turns out not so much, right? And that's where I think part of the journey of an entrepreneur is that realization that there will be amazing moments, wonderful moments, things you'll just cherish as part of your career experience. And then there'll be a lot of really tough days. And sometimes it's hard to appreciate kind of how that mix will turn out for you. And for us, we had no idea we were heading 6 months, 7 months later into a once in a century pandemic. And, our stock zoomed from 26 to 40 and then 50. And then that next March, COVID hit. And in one day, our stock dropped clear down to $17 a share, way below our IPO price, way, way below that first day close. And it kind of rocked our world. And it didn't just rock our world. Obviously, everyone's world was rocked, but in particular, the healthcare sector saw overnight its entire business model kind of turned on its head. Where for a healthcare organization, a health system, and those are all of our clients, they have the most profitability in the outpatient and elective care settings, and all of that went away with COVID, and they still had all the costs associated with those outpatient clinics and those outpatient procedures, and none of the revenue, and no one for a period of months knew how's this going to resolve? Are we just going to have a massive number of health systems that go bankrupt? And, it took a while for us to figure out the economic model. And meanwhile, so many individuals were getting sick with COVID. And in the inpatient setting, we had to figure out how do we shift all of our resources to the treatment of COVID patients? And how do you treat a COVID patient? And so we had to shift all of our focus. Our clients were all shifting their focus, and none of them had money to pay for it. And so this is again where I think that focus on the mission orientation, these timeless principles, and the reason why we exist really helped us to say, look, let's not worry about the money right now, and let's live the golden rule. That's our overarching governing principle at Health Catalyst. Treat others the way we would wish to be treated. And if we put ourselves in the shoes of clinical leaders at our clients, they would want a partner that just helps them, help us understand how many people are coming in, what treatments they're getting, how should we track, the COVID virus so that we prevent further spread? How do we do that for patients? How do we do that for clinicians? How do we make sure every day that our clients know we're in this with them? And that became our focus for, the next 9 months or so. And we figured that if we live the golden rule, we'll figure out the finances. And thankfully, there was meaningful government help that came in and really rescued the healthcare industry. And that also helped us kind of get back on our feet as a company. But wow, for a while there, we were having daily stand-up calls, daily team member meetings, weekly team member meetings, and the whole world had to kind of figure things out and change their focus. Then in 2021, boy, that was a good year for many. Our health systems felt better. The vaccines came out. It seemed like we were getting back to normal, and the markets went kind of crazy, right? In terms of the way that they were valuing companies. And here again, there were some moments there where everyone thought, wow, you guys at Health Catalyst are really smart. Your stock, we hit an all-time high of $60. We were $3 billion. And there were a lot of companies that were, I think, maybe making this mistake that I did, thinking, well, yeah, maybe we are pretty smart. We got this figured out. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so grateful early on that one of our principles that we focus a lot on at Health Catalyst is humility. And that constant reminder that we're actually not quite as good as sometimes we think we are. And we should try to stay humble and be good learners and quickly learn when things change. And I wasn't perfect back then for sure. I think we maybe drank a little bit too much of our own Kool-Aid, and then, man, as we exited 2021 and went into 2022, inflation just hit everyone, and it hit healthcare even more than other industries where there was a labor shortage for nurses. So you saw labor costs going up double digits, 10, 11, 12% at most of our clients, and supplies costs going up 10, 11, 12% at most of our clients. And it turned out that actually 2022 and 2023 were worse than the COVID years from a financial perspective for our health system clients. And so we thought we'd just gotten through a really, really tough year, which we had. But then in mid 2022 through 2023, it was even harder financially for our clients and therefore for us at Health Catalyst as well. And there again, like, you have to kind of step back, and we saw our $60 stock price drop to $6, right? And like, how do you work your way through that?
Yeah, that's wild.
And how do you keep moving forward? And that was really tough. Like, our clients found themselves in a spot where they were all in a negative operating margin situation, and we support all of them, and so we knew it was really going to be tough for us as well. And we also knew that probably for the first time in our history, we were going to need to look at layoffs. And as you know, Clint, we've tried to be a really great place to work at Health Catalyst and care about team members and focus on servant leadership. And that was just, like, for me personally, that was pretty devastating for our leadership team. And we tried to think, well, okay, those are the cards that we have been dealt. Now, how do we at least try to apply those same principles that we codified all those years back to a really, really tough situation? And one of the things that I just personally felt like was, gosh, with regards to servant leadership, it needs to start at the top. And so in mid 2022, I approached our board and I said, look, we're going to need to make a lot of cuts. I think we should start with me. And so I asked, and the board supported working for no compensation for 18 months from mid 2022 to the end of 2023.
How did your wife feel about that?
Not great, but she supported that decision, and that 18-month period. I'm really grateful that we made that choice. That I would not get compensated, cash or equity compensation. That we would disproportionately cut at the most senior levels of the company. So we would cut there first. And we still did need to reduce at every level of the company. And we had to go through a couple rounds of those reductions. But we also tried to follow those principles of the golden rule and being generous on our severance package and rallying around these teammates to try to help them find a great position at another company. And we were not perfect. But we made it through, and really, really tough period of time. So, long answer to your question, but boy, if I knew then what I knew now, I think we'd still do it. It was the opportunity for us to stay independent as a company.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're independent as a company, you can keep that focus on the mission, keep the focus on the culture. And I'm grateful that we've survived through that. But we still are battling with, I was looking at our share price today. I look at it every day.
Mm-hmm.
I wish I could just sort of set that aside. That's one of the most difficult parts, I think, of being a public company is every team member is sort of looking every single day. And the stock market is just really volatile. But I never thought I would be excited to see our stock cross above $7, which it did today.
Yeah.
But here we are.
It's an interesting market. It's a crazy, crazy, very fascinating market. I want to get back to, you've mentioned servant leadership a few times. What is that?
Yeah. I think such an important concept. So again, we try to be students of data. We try to be good learners at Health Catalyst. And at the center of our strategy at Health Catalyst is team member engagement. And the concept there is, if we have deeply engaged team members, when you look at the data, they're not 10% more productive or 12% more productive. They're like 10 times more productive. And so in understanding like, well, what drives engagement? And the Gallup organization, in my opinion, has some of the richest data sets. They've been doing this, studying this for 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the top elements that correlates and maybe even causes engagement is the relationship between a team member and their direct supervisor. And there again, that kind of goes back to like, when you're 5 people, you're the direct supervisor.
Yeah.
When you're 1,500 people, like we are today, we have 200 people managers at Health Catalyst. And so we try to think through like, how do we ensure that all 200 of those are extraordinary leaders? Because of that deep relationship between, if there's a good relationship between the team member and the direct supervisor, engagement goes way up. There's a bad relationship, then team member turnover goes up, engagement is down, that productivity takes a huge hit. So one of the things that we developed and that we encourage and require for every people manager at Health Catalyst, and we refer to them as servant leaders, is a servant leadership course that we developed that emphasizes what we believe are really important timeless principles that we didn't invent. It's really important. Like, none of the operating principles that we espouse, none of the cultural attributes were invented at Health Catalyst. And we believe anyone who applies those will have good results. And our goal is just, how do we reinforce those same kind of principles? And for us, servant leadership, one of the 2x2 matrices that we use in that training for all people managers is the concept of high love and high expectations. And how do we find that balance where we always start with love for the team member, and servant leadership is all about team members knowing that we care about them. So we talk a lot about being a great listener. Listen first. In every one-on-one that you hold with a team member, only have a couple of agenda topics. It's, how are things going and how can I help? Right?
Yeah.
How can I help you be successful? So I'm here to serve you. And then you couple that high love with high expectations, where one of our operating principles is excellence. That we need to achieve excellence. We need to be accountable. That's another of our principles that we talk a lot about. So how do you marry those two in the right balance as a servant leader? But we emphasize, you start with love. You start with service. You start with advocacy for these team members. And then you feather in the high expectations. But that's a course that all of our people managers go through. We try to reinforce it once every other week. We gather all servant leaders together, and a few of us on the leadership team will present, and we have Q&A. And again, we're always trying to reemphasize the importance of that relationship between a team member and their servant leader, because it drives engagement.
What does a typical day look like for you?
Well, it's changed a lot since COVID. We, at a company level, even before COVID, were quite flexible in terms of remote work versus in office. But certainly for me personally, now post-COVID, I spend most of my time working from home. We enable virtually every team member to kind of make that choice for themselves as well. One choice, with the benefit of hindsight, that doesn't look so great. We signed a pretty large 10-year lease and did a full build out of this beautiful new office space that we finished in February of 2020. So timing there, not the best. And it was a 5-floor building, and we're going to take all 5 floors. Now we have like most of 1 floor, and we still don't utilize it fully. But we give our team members flexibility, and I appreciate that flexibility as well. So for me, I work from home most days, and then try to be focused on, from the various roles in my life, which I think is a challenge and a battle for all of us. How do we move forward in a positive way in each of those areas? And one of those roles is my role as a CEO. But for me, that's not the most important role. There are other roles in my life that tend to actually be easier to crowd out because there's always more work in the CEO role than there are hours in the day.
Yeah.
And I had a mentor who you know well, Fraser Bullock,
Yeah.
who served as our board chair for many years, and he was the one that kind of helped me as he was serving as our board chair, and we would get together for lunch at the Harvest restaurant, which is still my favorite restaurant.
I think you and I went to lunch there when
we've gone
many
there,
years ago.
and at one of those lunches, he shared this concept of a daily dashboard, where for him, he found that same challenge that often our work lives have more to-dos than there are hours in the day, and they seem really urgent and really important. And so on any given day, it's really easy to have work crowd out those other areas. But he shared with me that he had developed his own kind of daily dashboard and identified items in each day that would help prioritize those other areas of life. And it sort of tricked his mind into realizing those areas are really important. And if they get neglected, they actually also become urgent. And so for me, after that lunch discussion, I spent a good deal of time and I visited with my wife about it and developed what I refer to as my daily 12. So a great day for me is if I'm able to get all 12 of those items in during the day, and they help me keep a focus on my relationship with God, my relationship with my spouse and children. They help me to make sure I'm living true to my values of kindness and service to others, and my relationship with my faith is really important, and serving in that capacity. And how do I make sure every day I'm tending to those things? And then also, absolutely, I want to do a great job as CEO. And part of what I found is when I'm tending to those other areas, I'm just a better CEO as well. And some of those that I realize may sound pretty pedestrian, but the first one on my list is getting good sleep at night.
Yeah.
And because I've found, and my wife and kids can attest to this, when I don't get enough sleep, like everything else just looks worse. It goes worse. And sometimes I think we as leaders feel like we're supposed to be superhuman. And I certainly struggled with that. I felt like I should be able to do everything always and not need more than 4 or 5 hours of sleep at night. And I think for all of us, maybe at some point we kind of crash and we realize, like, one way or another, we have to face the fact that we're not superhuman. I'm not superhuman. And so if I don't get at least 7 hours of sleep at night, like, I'm not going to do a great job in these other areas. So that's the first one. And I track it every day to make sure that I kind of have an early warning system if I'm getting behind on sleep, that I know, gosh, I need to catch up there, or I'm not going to be a good CEO or a good husband or father or bishop or whatever the other roles are. And that dashboard has really helped me. So for me, I have quite a bit of flexibility in terms of when certain things get done. I'm a little bit more of a night owl. And so sometimes that means, I stay up late to make sure kind of get all those things in. But it helps really guide me on a daily basis to think about those 12 things that really help me try to live up to the kind of person. And I'm not perfect, and there's plenty of days I don't get all 12 in, but it's a really good day if I can get all 12 in.
What role does faith play in your life? And how does that manifest itself in your professional life?
Yeah. So for me, like, faith is everything. It's at the center of who I am. Doesn't mean I adhere to everything I believe in. I fall short every single day, but it's the central driving force in my life. And it's my relationship with God is the first on that list of the relationships that matter most. And a lot of those timeless principles that we didn't invent at Health Catalyst, but that we benefit from when we're consistent, for me, are evident in my faith, and and can be found in essentially every faith tradition.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the beautiful, I think, common elements of fabric that we as human beings experience it in different ways, and we have different frameworks that we use, and yet, like the concept of loving one another, and realizing that every individual that I interact with has immeasurable value, and I should love and respect them. And another principle that I know so little about what's going on in your life, and that just reinforces like the importance of humility. When we have an interaction, maybe it doesn't go quite well enough or as well as it could have, like not assuming that I know everything that's going on, and assuming positive intent with you, and having the humility to recognize like I don't know everything that's going on there, and a foundation of love for you, that I care about you, and maybe there's a way that I can be of help to you. And even when I think about like concepts of servant leadership, which again, I believe in any organization, those principles need to be adhered to the most at the top of the organization. And if they're not, it's amazing how smart team members are. Like they spot it in a minute, right? In a moment, they'll see that disconnect between what we say, and what we do. And so again, for me, and my faith, like my personal hero is Jesus Christ. And when I look at him, like one of the things I love about him is he was always consistent.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a good goal to strive for. And for me, when I try to do that across all these roles and all these areas of my life, like that never fails me. And that includes in my CEO role. So it's at the center. It's again, it doesn't mean I fall short every single day, and it's kind of frustrating, but it's this anchor for me that kind of keeps me grounded in the things that matter most.
You mentioned humility, which I think is a big piece of being a leader, is being humble. Why is that so hard for leaders? Why is that so hard for CEOs? Why is it so hard for all of us?
Yeah, great question. I think, so I personally believe that we kind of have this human nature that's inside of us that isn't great, and tends towards maybe selfishness and greed and arrogance, and then we've got another part of us inside that is striving to be better than that and different than that. But in this world that we live in, and in this capitalist economy, it's built around selfishness and greed and competition, right? And so I think you're sort of swimming upstream a lot in a lot of different ways if you want to go against selfishness, greed, arrogance, when you're building a startup, when you're operating in this capitalistic economy. And so, and that certainly has been true for us at Health Catalyst. And I think that was one of the most important insights. Again, I credit our founders for highlighting that, man, if we don't find a way to kind of swim upstream of the natural tendencies that are kind of in each one of us, and they're reinforcing this capitalistic, greed-based economy, that we're just going to go with the flow. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what happens, to kind of all of us. Certainly, what happened to me, and I think it's really tempting to believe, some of our own hype. And when things are going well, there's a lot of reinforcement. I also would say, in really senior roles like the CEO role, there's often a lot of reasons why those that report to you want to only share the good news, or they want to agree with you, or they want, their self-interest is such that if they do that, they hope that maybe there'll be a promotion and that will go better for them. And I think there again, you have to think about what are ways to kind of counter that as a CEO, so that you're actually getting the straight scoop of what's going on. You're getting unfiltered feedback. And so a couple of the structural things at Health Catalyst that we've tried to do is like skip level one-on-ones. So every year, my goal is to do 200 or so skip level one-on-ones with team members at every level across every department, and just listen and kind of just give them the opportunity to share with me what's going well, what's not going so well. And then I think using third parties, like the Gallup organization. So every year, every team member is invited to share their feedback, quantitative and qualitative, in an anonymous setting where it's confidential, it's not attributed to them. And our goal is to get unfiltered feedback, right? But if you don't find some mechanisms like that in a CEO role and a senior role, I think you'll end up hearing what you want to hear in many cases. And you got that tendency inside of you, I certainly do, of wanting to believe that. And so finding ways to kind of counter that is really important.
As you know, and we end every interview with this question, as you know, at Silicon Slopes, we believe the chances one gives is just as important as the chances one takes. When you hear that, who gave you a chance to get you to where you are today?
Oh my goodness. Well, our co-founders took a great chance on me, and a big chance, a big risk. And when we were early on, and it was 3 people, and we got involved, first in an investment role. For us in our history, Sequoia Capital became interested, and they had some requirements and some demands, and they're trying to figure out who should lead, this organization, and at that point, our co-founders, took a leap of faith with me, and I didn't have a lot of CEO experience at that point, and I'd done other things in my career at bigger companies, but had never, built and led a software company, and Steve and Tom were willing to take that leap of faith on me. I think Fraser's another person who, we were this little tiny company, and he's done all these amazing things, and now he's brought the Olympics back.
He's an incredible man.
Incredible guy, right? And we're this little tiny company, and we're trying to think about who should be our chair. And I thought, man, I could learn so much from him. And we asked him, and he said yes. And we probably had no business asking for his help, but he's been incredibly gracious and helpful. Probably the last person is my wife, Sarah. Wow. She took a big risk on me. And we're coming up in 2 months on our 29th anniversary.
That's incredible. Congratulations.
And, she's the most important person in my life. And she knows all my weaknesses and all my shortcomings, but she's stuck with me. And I'm so grateful for that relationship. That's really another anchor in my soul.
That's awesome. Dan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Clint.